Aldous Huxley was an English writer and philosopher. He wrote nearly 50 books. And here's his quote about history. That men do not learn very much from the lessons of history is the most important of all the lessons of history. Welcome to the History Slices podcast, a mother-son duo discussing awesome bits of history. We prove on every show that history is not boring, entertaining, yet stimulating. This is History Slices. And now, here's your hosts, Jacob and Rachel.
Hello and welcome to the podcast. I'm Rachel.
And I'm Jacob.
We're glad to have you along on this episode. And Jacob, I think I remember from last time we are discussing the football war.
Yes. Do you know anything about this?
Only that you emphasized it's not football as in American football. It's football as in soccer.
Yes. Yeah. I wanted to clarify because we're American. So we have it's that separated by a common language thing, you know, like how in the UK color is spelled with a U.
Yeah.
Well, in America, it isn't, you know, it's just one of those things.
Just one of those things. I'm sure there's a whole history there, but
probably,
but we're not talking just about football. We're talking about the football war. So clue me in, because honestly, I might have a vague idea about a war or some sort of conflict that began because of a soccer game, but I could have told that much just from the title. So I don't know. Yeah. What can you teach me today?
Okay. So the football war, it's also called the 100 Hours War because that's roughly how long it lasted. It was
It's really short.
Right. 1969 conflict between Honduras and El Salvador.
Okay. So Honduras and El Salvador, 100 hours. That's just a little bit over 4 days.
Yes.
So, okay. Wow.
Yeah. So what I'm going to do is, because the conflict itself is very short, I'm going to talk about why this happened, the lead up to it, and kind of maybe some of the consequences of it, if you will.
Yeah.
And these are two, not to knock them, but they're two smaller countries. So it isn't like some...
Now, to test my geography, those are both in Central America,
yes.
right? Okay.
Yes, they are. They're right above Nicaragua.
Okay.
Anywho, so first of all, you know, Honduras, despite being a small country, had more land than El Salvador. That's just, you know, how the borders ended up. I don't really know the history behind it. But the problem was El Salvador had a bigger population, around 3 million to Honduras' 2 million or so.
Okay.
That's a lot of farmers, a lot of farmland. But
in both places, it was farmland?
Yeah, but there wasn't a lot of room to farm in El Salvador because it's a lot smaller.
Yeah.
So what happened is a lot of farmers illegally immigrated to Honduras just to have more room and chance to make more of a livelihood. Now, a lot of the numbers in this story and in history really, but in this story in particular, it seems like a lot of numbers are kind of best estimates, you know. We don't have the exact number.
I think our brains kind of deal better with estimates anyway, like round numbers.
Sure, yeah. The number I found was 30,000. That could be inaccurate.
Illegal immigrants.
Yeah, Honduras.
That's a lot in a population of, if they only had 2 million beginning and then about 30,000 immigrated. Was that over the course of a decade? Or?
Honduras had 2 million. El Salvador had
I'm sorry, I meant to say 2 million. So how long, over what period of time did those immigrants?
Generations.
Okay.
It was a while. It was an ongoing thing. Now, in 1964, right, a few years before the football war, as it became known, a Honduran leader by the name of Oswaldo Lopez Arellano. I'm not sure how to pronounce his last name. I'm sorry.
You're probably close.
Yeah. Anyways, he staged a coup and kind of became the dictator of Honduras. Central and to an extent, I think South America was America, like the United States of America's sphere of influence, right?
Okay. Central America was under United States spheres of influence.
Yeah.
That's what you're saying. Okay.
Yeah. In a sense that the U.S. was the superpower on the continent, you know, the one that had all the, not authority, but all the influence and power and stuff. Kind of like how during the time, because this is still the Cold War, of course, the Soviet Union had a lot of influence over Eastern Europe and stuff.
Okay.
Kind of.
Yeah.
Just from geographical. That's right. We'll keep that in. That's funny. Geographical location and all that. the reason why the U.S. was more okay with a dictator springing up in their backyard was because he was very much anti-communist. A lot of times in the Cold War, not a lot, but enough that it was a pattern. The United States had this attitude of, well, at least he's gonna, because it was part of the policy of containment, the idea of keeping communism from spreading.
Right.
And even if that means like, oh, this guy is kind of a brutal leader, at least he is friendly to us, or he isn't pro that ideology, which didn't really help some of our like international reputation in some places. But
you mean because the U.S. Just allowed it to go unchecked, sort of?
Yeah, kind of. Well, regardless, Oswaldo, I'm going to call him that because I think it's a funny name. Oswaldo kind of mishandled Honduras's economy a bit. I just don't think he was very competent in terms of that. He also, like, a thing he did was he kept exporting fruit, which is like their major like export, to like American, like United States American companies free of tax and stuff, because he there's some bribing going on and stuff like that, kind of under the table, kind of shady stuff, but it really didn't help their
had
economy.
A bad impact.
Yeah.
This might not matter at all, but
sure.
So he staged a coup in 1964 to take over the government, and he was a dictator, but not a communist.
Yeah.
What was the situation before he took over? Do you know? And maybe that has no bearing on the story.
It doesn't really have bearing on the story.
Okay.
I don't know.
Okay.
Whether they were more left leaning or right leaning.
Yeah. Okay. All right. I just didn't know if that mattered. So.
Sure.
Okay.
Well, that's a good question.
Yeah,
to
I'm
ask.
just trying to wrap my head around.
Yeah. No, I gotcha.
So.
It's tricky because not only is it history, it's history of a country we're not entirely familiar with.
That's true, and there's so much happening around the world during. Well, there always is, you know, but yeah. So there's a lot of context. I know that you're going to be filling me in on, and I just didn't know if that was part of it.
No, it's all good.
Okay.
Anyway, so the economy started to suffer. He actually, I think at one point, he staged like a phony election. So like, look, people like me, and people are like, we don't like. No, that's regardless, he was very unpopular. People are like, dude, what's going on? So he decided to kind of do that typical dictator thing and throw scapegoats, and he started blaming the Salvadorian immigrants for like taking all the farming and their jobs and stuff like that. Now, enough people ate it up that it led to some violence between the native Hondurans and the Salvadorian immigrants.
Can I interrupt again?
Yes, of course.
Okay, you keep saying Salvadorian. Obviously, that's from El Salvador because that's where you started. But there's a country called San Salvador, too, isn't there? Or is San Salvador a city in El Salvador?
That's the capital. That's the capital of El Salvador.
Okay. All right. I just wanted to make sure. I wasn't sure if that was a city or if that was another country.
I didn't know that, but yeah, it makes sense.
So the Salvadorians definitely refers to
El Salvador
people from El Salvador.
Yes. Okay. Anyways, so
they were getting
the
bad rap for everything,
and in fact, some of them ended up being forcibly exported back to their home country.
Okay.
Because again, like they're right next to each other. Yeah. Like it's not like there's a giant ocean in between them or something like that. Now, El Salvador, the country, really disliked what Honduras was doing to its immigrants, partly because of ethical reasons, but also partly because they didn't really have room for
space for them to come back.
Yeah. So it was also like a very practical, like we can't take care of the, yeah, and in a nutshell, tensions are pretty high between these two countries. They don't really like each other. Enter football. Now, I don't know if you know this. Central and South America love football. Like that's a big part of their culture. I know
that's just a huge sport for them, and also Spain and other countries.
Sure, yeah. But they
get pretty heated.
They're really into that. Yeah, and good for them, awesome. I'm not much of a sports guy, as you know. Anyone listening now, I'm way more nerdy than that. But it's good to have something that everyone kind of agrees on. Like, right. Yeah. Oh, this is a cool thing. Around. Yeah. Well, the 1970 World Cup Qualifiers are going on. So Honduras and El Salvador are kind of going off against each other in order to see who goes on into the World Cup.
Okay.
Because of course they are.
Yeah.
These two nations that don't like each other. So
pretty interesting.
It is
way off base, but it's interesting because they're really relatively tiny. Well, they're small countries.
They are.
And they're producing two teams that can compete at a level to be vying for a position at the World Cup. I think that's pretty amazing.
Yeah. Well, I like it because it's like, it doesn't really matter. Like, I don't think, at least it should matter what size your country is. I think it speaks more to
the passion about the game, probably, and how it's, it's in. They probably start playing like right out of the womb, So, yeah.
I don't know.
Okay,
really
so that was just a little side comment about that. So they're vying for this position.
Yes, and so they have 3 matches. This is 1969, by the way.
Oh, okay.
The year that the football war happens.
Oh, okay.
We'll get to that.
And you said it was a 1970.
World Cup. So this is the qualifiers for that.
Before that. Okay.
Mm-hmm. So you have 3 matches to face off against each other. See who comes out on top. One on June 8th, one on June 15th, and one on June 26th.
That's nice. They had a whole week to rest in between.
Yeah. So I'm going to go through the 3 matches and tell you why this slowly descended into chaos.
Okay. Gosh.
I know. I'll get to it, but yeah, I'll get to it.
Okay.
So the first match on June 8th was held in Honduras. So the night before, the Salvadorian, I guess, team is sleeping in their hotel, but some native Hondurans show up outside the hotel and start making a racket. They start throwing taunts. They start like banging stuff. They start
just being jerks, so
keeping them up.
Good night's sleep.
Now I found out this is something that happens kind of regularly in that area of the world when it comes to sports matches.
Just trying to undermine the competition.
Yeah, which I don't think is very sporting, but
it doesn't seem very sporting.
I understand, it's very much like, the emotions and stuff like that. I get it. Yeah. But regardless, the Honduran team.
Tanya Harding just popped into my head.
Yeah, basically.
Yeah.
The Honduran team beat the Salvadorian team because the Salvadorian team was half asleep. Like they couldn't really bring their A game. Now, and that's all fine and dandy. However, a young Salvadorian by the name of Amelia Bolanos, I think is how you say her last name. She was devastated by the results, and she ended up committing suicide.
Emilio or Amelia?
Amelia.
Oh, Amelia, sorry. Oh, she was devastated and committed suicide?
Yeah. So...
My gosh, that's dramatic.
I know, right? So in a move that's probably not okay, the Salvadorian media / government, they labeled her a patriot. They labeled her like a national hero. They basically glorified her, which is pretty messed up. But again, I understand.
I can understand a little bit, but you'd have to be really careful not to encourage that kind of response to a loss.
Mm-hmm. So the next match was held in El Salvador on June 15th. The same thing happened in reverse in the sense that the Salvadorians made a racket outside a Honduran hotel. And
what's good for the goose is good for the gander,
I guess. And I think the Honduran team knew what was happening because the next day they raised, instead of the Honduran flag, they raised a white surrender flag.
Wow.
I know, right? Which is pretty dramatic. But sure. The game itself was crazy. Salvadorian fans brought pictures of Amelia, like the girl. Fights broke out in the stands. Of course, the Salvadorian team won, but the Honduran team had to basically flee back to Honduras in like an armored bulletproof bus.
Wow.
Yeah, rocks thrown at them.
Imagine if the Hondurans had won that game.
I know, right? Well, that's what in my research I actually found out, or allegedly, quote unquote, the coach for that team is like, "You're lucky you lost." Basically to them.
Oh my gosh.
Right? Because it was just like...
The tensions were so high.
Yeah, and it's like, I hesitate to use the word toxic because that has a lot of connotations I don't know apply here. Yeah. But it was tensions were so high that it was basically like a really toxic atmosphere,
or electric.
Sure. Back in Honduras, this the Salvadorian win ended up causing more harassment on immigrants and stuff.
I'm sorry, let me clarify. So you said back home in Honduras, it caused a greater issue for the Salvadorian immigrants over there.
Sorry,
I gotcha.
Because
you're fine. I just had to get my ideas straight in my head.
There are even some cases of like houses being burned down and people chased off their land and stuff.
Wow.
So pretty bad.
People are pissed off.
Oh yeah. So
Isn't that terrible? People always need some way to vent their anger like that.
Absolutely. So the last match, June 26th, was held in Mexico, specifically Mexico City.
That's interesting. So I wonder, it just planned in a neutral place. Okay.
I guess. Well, regardless, they couldn't pull their classic keep the other team up all night routine there because it wasn't there. You know, it was in Mexico. It wasn't in Honduras or El Salvador.
Right.
And it was a very close game because of that. I'm sure. That being, and this was the whoever won this would have gone on to the World Cup.
Would have. Oh, you're making me really
No.
wonder.
I'm sorry. I mean, like
the winner of this game will have gone on.
Yeah, and
or did go on to the World Cup.
El Salvador won.
Okay.
There was a riot. More violence erupted back in Honduras. So El Salvador, despite winning the football portion of this conflict, they're pretty ticked off at this point because of all the violence against Salvadorians living in Honduras, because of their unmanageable refugee crisis they now have, because of them being pushed back into El Salvador, because of just like everything else. They declared war on Honduras. Now, it's really easy to call this conflict frivolous, I think, because of the name and because of like, is this all over football?
Yeah.
But it isn't.
Because the name does make it seem like there were just a couple teams who were really bad sports and it turned into...
it escalated and got out of hand. Well, it's less about losing the World Qualifiers or the qualifiers for the World Cup or anything. It's more about everything else that led up to it and the reasons why tensions were so high.
Yeah, because that really was... I was thinking of an analogy, you know, like the pot was already full of water on the stove and all they had to do was turn on the fire. So play the game and it was already
That's
ripe.
a good analogy. Yeah. The June 26th match in Mexico City, that was merely the catalyst. That just was the final straw that broke the camel's back, if you want to get all metaphorical with it. It doesn't excuse going to war, but it does... I think it's important to know the context.
So just real quick before we go on to the context.
Sure.
In Mexico City, after the game was done, you said there's rioting and things like that? Or
I think there was because obviously a lot of fans of the two teams were there. So I think there was a fight broke out. I don't know like the scope of it necessarily.
Okay. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, you're good. So what it did was El Salvador... The first thing they did after declared war, they launched a bombing run over Honduras, targeting specific locations, including the somewhat infamous Toncontin International Airport. I believe that's how it's pronounced.
Okay.
A reason I don't know if you've heard of it, basically because of where it is geographically, it's a bit of a dangerous airport. There's been a lot of accidents and stuff and air traffic incidences there.
Oh, gosh.
But they bombed it, which... delayed the Honduran Air Force getting up into the ground, to the air.
That's interesting that the Air Force would have been relying on.
Well, anyway, that was just one of the places that they...
Gosh.
Then they began a land invasion and started pushing into Honduras. By the second day, they're almost at the Honduran capital. Remember, these are small countries.
Yeah. I'm trying to remember, too. They're kind of long, skinny countries, too, aren't they?
They're
the border that joins them is not along a long border, is it?
It's, well...
Not that it matters. I'm just trying to picture.
No. Basically, imagine that like, I'm like gesturing my hands. The audience can't see this, but you know how Central America kind of has that like kind of curve. Yeah. Imagine that Honduras is in like the middle and on the side of it is El Salvador.
Oh, okay. So they are side by side,
they
not
are
north and south of each other.
Yeah,
okay.
No, they're like
so
east to west.
Back to what you're saying, they pushed in, and on the second day they were almost to the Honduran capital.
Yes, and that's where the OAS stepped in.
OAS,
the Organization of American States.
Oh, I'd never heard such a thing existed.
It still exists.
The OAS.
Yep, it's what it sounds like. It's an international organization. It was founded in 1948, and basically it tries to have peace and cooperations among the various North and the South American countries and like in the Caribbean and stuff. Yeah, but it's still a thing. There's a couple European like observers that are allowed there.
Huh.
It's interesting. Yeah. I guess I don't know. I guess it doesn't come up all that often.
Yeah, that's interesting. I never heard of it, but
it's still a thing. I think
it seems like an important thing.
Yeah, I haven't. I don't know too much about it either.
So they got involved though. They got involved like on the second day.
Yeah, because they're like, no, you can't go to war. Like this is a bad thing. Don't do this. So they began negotiations specifically with El Salvador because they were the aggressors in this conflict. Yeah, technically, at least as far as the war was involved, So the third day, the Honduran Air Force, they're back up. They're ready to go. They recovered pretty quickly, all things considered. Nicaragua, which is like the country underneath like Honduras, started to kind of help them out a little bit.
Okay.
I think they sent like some extra supplies or whatever. But they started bombing Salvadorian air bases and oil fields, kind of getting back at them. Now, something that is very clear when you're looking at warfare, especially warfare of this type where it's like actual troops moving and stuff. Yeah. If you cut the supply lines, you can't advance. Like that's like the lifeblood basically. And it happened here too, where like they stopped, they couldn't get to the capital because they didn't have supply lines anymore. And suddenly the situation wasn't very good for El Salvador suddenly. So they're like, okay, we can talk.
Yeah. I wonder if it's like, not only they're not advancing, they could, be surrounded in somebody else's country.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
So they were willing to come to the negotiating table.
Yeah. Yeah. And, because they're at a stalemate basically. So El Salvador agreed to, OAS's, I guess that's how you say that, demands. It's like, okay, well, calm down. A ceasefire was organized on July 18th. They kept their troops in Honduras for a little bit, but when they started being threatened by sanctions, which they couldn't handle. So
El Salvador is being threatened by sanctions from Honduras?
From OAS? The OAS, yeah. Okay. And they couldn't handle that because already, everything, all
the crisis that their country is already in.
Yeah, so they're like, okay, we'll pull back. And they did so on August 2nd. Huh. So it's hard to determine casualties, again, because numbers are hard to get exact, And
before you give me that number, though, can I ask you a question?
Of course.
I was remembering back, you told me that it was 100 hours that the war took place. Roughly. But on July, I think I put down my notes, July 18th and then August 2nd. Sorry. Yeah. So July 18th is when they kind of were into negotiation, I think. And then August 2nd is when they accepted it and the war was over.
Yeah. What happened was July 18th was when the war ended.
Did the war start on like July 14th and I missed that one? Okay. I apologize. I got it. So between the 14th and 18th, that's considered sort of the active war. Yes. And then negotiations happened and everything was back to quote unquote normal August 2nd.
Yeah. And that's when El Salvador pulled its troops out of Honduras.
Okay. Great. All right. Sorry. That was kind of a detail that
no, it's okay.
I must have missed.
No, it's good. It's always good to ask for clarification because sometimes I talk too quick and I don't realize when I'm leaving you behind.
It's so funny because I can literally feel my brain like half a step behind you going, okay. All right. So anyway, you're going to tell me approximation of the casualties of that 4 days.
Yes.
This is the casualties during that 4 days?
Yes.
Okay.
Around 6,000 people were killed.
Oh my gosh.
With around another 15,000 injured. Again, we don't know the exact numbers for sure.
Oh my gosh, 6,000
That's a lot.
People.
That's a lot for a 4-day war.
That's really, really something. Mm-hmm. I wonder if most of them were civilians.
I don't know.
That's sad.
Yeah, it is. Another interesting fact, I kind of hesitate to call it a fun fact given the little tidbit we were just talking about. Neither country had jet fighters at this point. They all had older, like World War II era models.
Wow.
So this was like the last war to have piston engineered fighter craft.
Wow. Mm-hmm. 1970, 69.
Yeah, close.
1969. Wow. Mm-hmm. That's really something to think about.
Yeah. So obviously to get into like kind of the consequences of this, because there's always consequences.
This is kind of morbid, really, but there were 6,000 fewer people in the region that they had to worry about placing. I mean, they were talking about 30,000 immigrants into Honduras. So 6,000, that's such a big chunk of people. It's really sad. Anyway, sorry. So the consequences.
Yeah. So obviously both countries were hurt a lot by this conflict, especially in the money department. El Salvador still had its refugee crisis that was unable to take care of. This, like a decade later, eventually led to a civil war that lasted for 12 years.
Oh my gosh, in El Salvador.
Yeah, from 1979 to 1992. I didn't do too much research on it because it wasn't the focus.
Can you imagine a civil war lasting that long?
You're right. But from what I did look at it, it was very brutal.
Oh my gosh. See, there's so much history right there, right in Central America that I know it's kind of a hotbed. It feels like a hotbed to me. Maybe that's just because the little bit I know about it is all about conflict and illegal things happening.
Yeah. There's still tension to this day between these two countries because the war had left some border disputes.
As far as where the border is?
Yeah, not completely, but there's some areas. I think there's like a gulf or something that each nation's claimed as theirs, basically.
Oh my gosh. That was actually going to be one of my questions was, what are relations like between the two countries now?
Yeah, I don't know if it's as bad as it was then, but it's still tension. As for the World Cup, El Salvador went on to play and lost every round it was in.
Oh my gosh.
So it didn't really pan out for that either.
Oh, wow. That's really, it's really interesting to hear about that football war and all those tensions. But what's more interesting to me is just the repercussions throughout, ongoing.
Another like kind of final interesting tidbit to kind of tie it back home to stuff that we as Americans or United States American, that's a thing that some other American countries get salty at when we call ourselves Americans. It's like, no, it's all America. It's like, oh, I know.
Some United Statesians?
I don't know. Yeah. Regardless, the reason why I totally understand why you didn't know about this and why not a lot of people here do know about it is because on the second day of that conflict, Apollo 11 launched.
Oh,
right.
Wow.
And that completely overshadowed the whole news network.
Wow. That's really fascinating. It's so surprising to me that we as United States don't really get to learn a lot more about Mexico, the history of Mexico, Central America. I mean, they're not that far away.
No, they're our neighbors, basically. Kind of a criticism I've heard in regards to like American education system, and I've heard a couple, but one of them is that our history classes are a little too American centric, and I guess that makes sense because I think a lot of country, like if it was in France, it'd be French centric.
Sure, yeah, it should be American centric, buddy. Don't get me started. I think that we really fall short when it comes to teaching history, American or otherwise, in our schools. That's really a shame. But yeah, I think if we can't even do justice to the American history, I can see why we don't get to learn any other. But it's really travesty might be too strong of a word, but it really helps shape your understanding of the world around you if you understand not just your own little microcosm, but what's going on around the world in recent history too. I mean, I was alive when this was going on.
Yeah.
And, apparently you were, was that one, when did it end? The Civil War, 90?
The El Salvadorian Civil War ended in 1992.
Okay, so it was
a couple
just before
years
you were
before
born.
me,
Yeah.
but yeah.
Yeah, but recent history. And what did that do like for immigrants to our country? Did our country receive refugees from El Salvador during those 12 years when their small, overcrowded country was in conflict,
That's a great question, and I'm happy you asked it because it ties into what we're doing next.
Oh, great. That's amazing.
I know, right? So I'm like, cool.
Since I have no idea what we're doing next.
So this was a bit of a shorter episode, and I apologize.
I don't know if you need to apologize, but yeah.
Yeah, which is okay, because I feel like there's a lot of, if you didn't know about this conflict or this event, there you go. You learned, so you're smarter now, smarter every day. And if you did, I hope I did it well.
Justice.
But next week, we're going to have, this might be more than one part, I don't know.
Okay.
We're going to focus on immigration, specifically American immigration into the United States.
I'm looking forward to that. I'm really interested in immigration and U.S. immigration. Yeah, totally. And there's a lot I don't know about it. So that's awesome. I'm looking forward to that. I kind of hope it turns into a series because there's a lot of meat out there.
There is.
A lot of things to know.
Yeah, totally. So that's all I'll say for now.
Okay.
We'll dive into it next week. I hope you enjoyed this. I hope you learned something.
Awesome. I know I did, Jacob. I enjoyed it and learned something. So thank you very much, listeners. Thank you so much for being with us again. We love having you along for part of the conversation. So until next time.
Bye.
Confucius once said, "Study the past if you would define the future." You've been listening to the History Slices podcast with Jacob and Rachel. We hope you've gotten some useful information from the show. We hope we made you think, and we hope you were entertained. We know we had fun, and we'll be back soon. But in the meantime, hook up with us on Facebook at History Slices and on Instagram at History Slices Podcast. Make sure to like, rate, and review the show, and tell a friend about the show. That'll help us out too. One more quote before we go from Michael Crichton. "If you don't know history, then you don't know anything. You are a leaf that doesn't know it's part of a tree." Till next time, this is History Slices, signing off.